Jaylen Brown is now teammates with Joel Embiid, but their relationship is already raising eyebrows around the league. Reports claim the two haven't even spoken since becoming teammates, and that's only the beginning of what's really going on. Let me break it down. On July 1st, the Boston Celtics sent Jaylen Brown to the Philadelphia 76ers. Brown was traded to Embiid's 76ers on July 1 in exchange for Paul George and draft picks. That's it, 10 years in Boston, a championship, a finals MVP, gone in exchange for an aging forward and some picks. And here's the part that makes this different from a normal trade. Brown wasn't headed to some random rebuilding team. Boston traded Jaylen Brown, a finals MVP and 10-year cornerstone, to the rival Philadelphia 76ers for Paul George and a package of draft picks. He was headed straight into the building of the man he'd been trading shots with for years, because just 2 months earlier, during the playoffs, Brown had gone off on Joel Embiid in public. One day after the Celtics lost Game 7 to the Sixers in early May, Brown hopped on a Twitch livestream and said, "Joel Embiid is a great player, one of the best bigs in expletive basketball history. He flops. He knows it. This ain't breaking news. It is what it is." Now, Brown wasn't just talking trash for the sake of it. He was still stinging from a brutal exit. Boston had blown a lead in that series, and Brown didn't stop at Embiid. He turned it on the officials too, claiming the referees had it out for him the entire series. Brown said the officials had an agenda against him in Boston's 7-game first-round loss to the Philadelphia 76ers. He pointed to a specific sequence, saying Paul George got away with an offensive push-off that would have been called on him in a heartbeat. "If you're going to call push-offs, call that," Brown said. "Same move, same refs. Oh, it's nothing. It's play on, right? But you gonna call me? Everybody does it. But if it would have been me, it'd have been an offensive foul." He even suggested some of the referees working that series needed to be looked into. Some referees that if I had to choose, if I had to, say there's some referees that need to be investigated. We had 3 of them in the last 3 games. So that's the temperature 2 months before the trade. Brown is publicly accusing Embiid of flopping his way to calls, accusing the league of running an agenda against him, and doing it all on a live stream in front of hundreds of thousands of viewers. Then, out of nowhere, he's wearing a Sixers jersey. The reaction across the league was instant disbelief. The Sixers stunned the NBA by acquiring Jaylen Brown in a trade. With the Boston Celtics, the 5-time NBA All-Star and 2024 Finals MVP has quite a history with the Sixers. Over his last 10 years in the NBA, fans immediately started digging up the flopping rant and asking the obvious question, how does a locker room function when 2 of its best players have that kind of history? Then, less than 2 weeks later, the story got worse. Tracy McGrady, a Hall of Famer who happens to be one of Brown's closest mentors, dropped a bombshell on his own podcast. He said the two hadn't spoken since the trade. Not a text, not a call, nothing. The NBA legend said on his show Cousins with Vince Carter that Brown and Embiid have not spoken, despite being on the same team for almost 2 weeks. Brown was traded to Embiid's 76ers on July 1 in exchange for Paul George and draft picks. McGrady wasn't guessing either. He's close enough to Brown that he'd know. "I don't think there's been a conversation between the two, at least not to my knowledge," McGrady said. And it got more specific than that. McGrady pointed out that Brown had gone out of his way to connect with other new teammates, just not Embiid. McGrady said Brown has reached out to Tyrese Maxey and VJ Edgecombe. Think about that for a second. Brown had time to slide into the DMs of a 21-year-old second-year guard and a 25-year-old floor general, but not the franchise centerpiece, the former MVP, the guy who'd been the face of that franchise for over a decade. That's not an accident of scheduling. That's a pattern. Even McGrady, sitting there defending his guy, admitted the optics were bad. He said flat out that with the fresh start both players were getting, somebody needed to pick up the phone. McGrady and Carter said Brown should have reached out because it's been Embiid's team for so long, but the former Kansas center also should have made an attempt to have a conversation. He even said it directly, addressing Embiid like he was in the room. "We're getting off to a fresh start, Joel. You're getting off to a fresh start. And now you add in another MVP along with the young boys, that you have to make things easier for you," McGrady said. So now you've got a Hall of Fame insider, someone who has Brown's ear, publicly saying that the 2 best players on a title contender haven't had a real conversation. That's the story that broke. And that's when things really started to spiral. To understand why 2 grown men couldn't manage a text message, you have to go back further than one Twitch stream. This wasn't a one-off. Jaylen Brown and Joel Embiid had a well-documented, contentious history during Brown's 10 years as a member of the Celtics. The two franchises had been colliding in the postseason for years, and Brown was usually right in the middle of it. During Brown's tenure with the Celtics, they met the Sixers in the playoffs 4 times, and Brown has an all-time playoff record of 14-8 against the Sixers, including 3 series wins in 2018, 2020, and 2023, and 1 loss in 2026. He averaged 22.1 points, 5.5 rebounds, and 2.9 assists in the 4 series. Notice something in there. Brown won 3 of those 4 series. Embiid's Sixers only got past him once in the most recent meeting. So this wasn't some rivalry between equals trading haymakers back and forth. This was a decade where Brown mostly had Embiid's number, and then finally lost, and the flopping comments came right after. That one loss finally broke his streak. That timing matters. Brown wasn't some petty complainer taking shots at a guy who owned him. He was a player who had dominated this matchup for years, finally lost, and then torched the guy who beat him on the way out the door. That's a different kind of sting for Embiid, getting called a flopper by the guy who'd beaten him 3 separate times before finally losing to him. And it's worth remembering just how deep this rivalry runs, on both a team and personal level. The history between the Boston Celtics and Philadelphia 76ers is a rivalry built on decades of bruising playoff series, star-on-star duels, and generational grudges. From the eras of Larry Bird and Julius Erving to the modern battles between Joel Embiid and Boston's rotating core, Brown didn't just inherit that rivalry, he was one of its main characters for a decade. Now here's where it gets messier, because the flopping comment wasn't even the first time Brown's mouth got him into a situation with a superstar's inner circle. Back in 2024, at Summer League, Brown was caught on a hot mic making a comment about a young rookie that would come back to haunt him, Bronny James. Here's what happened. Jaylen Brown leaned into Kysra Gondrezick and Angel Reese courtside and whispered, "I don't think Bronny James is a pro," shaking his head back and forth during a 2024 Summer League game in Las Vegas. He clearly didn't think anyone was listening, but the cameras caught it, and it went everywhere. Brown tried to clean it up almost immediately. It's a flex to have your son alongside you in the NBA. It reflects greatness and longevity. Bronny has all the tools around him. To be successful, I look forward to watching his growth. Brown wrote in a post on X, "Nice save, in theory, except the damage was already done, and it stuck with LeBron for 2 full years." Fast forward to this past February, when LeBron was asked directly about his relationship with Brown after a Celtics-Lakers game, and he didn't let it go. "Our relationship has been pretty respectful," James said. "Besides that saint he said about Bronny at Summer League. But other than that, we've been all right. I think he went on social media and said something about it. It's all good." Notice the tone there. LeBron wasn't blowing it up into a war, but he also wasn't pretending it never happened. He kept the receipt in his back pocket and pulled it out anytime a reporter gave him the opening. That's the kind of thing that lingers in league circles. Not a screaming match, but a quiet, permanent asterisk next to Brown's name in certain rooms. And it's not just LeBron who's weighed in when the trade rumors started swirling and Brown's reputation came under fire. Around the league, Cameron actually jumped to his defense on the Bronny situation, arguing the whole thing got blown out of proportion by cameras zooming in on a private conversation. He was sitting courtside having a convo with somebody, and folks is reading lips and stuff. I can't really have a problem with Jaylen Brown if he's just chilling with his girl, having a conversation while watching somebody play. To me, I wouldn't be mad at Jaylen Brown if I was LeBron, because it ain't like he was on a rampage, Cameron said. So you've already got a guy with a documented pattern, comments caught on camera or live stream, comments that ruffle feathers among people connected to major stars, comments that require a cleanup tweet after the fact. And now that same guy is walking into a locker room to share a franchise with the exact person he most recently torched on a live stream. That context matters because it means the silence between Brown and Embiid wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was happening against a backdrop where Brown already had a reputation for saying things in the heat of the moment. That took months, sometimes years, to smooth over. Meanwhile, on the other side of this, Embiid had his own reasons to be skeptical of new arrivals. He'd watched multiple superstar partnerships in Philadelphia fall apart before. The front office had tried and failed to build a sustainable core around him for years, cycling through star after star. Brown might have to make awkward amends with Embiid. now that they are teammates on the 76ers in the wake of an out-of-nowhere trade. Because trying to win it all with a hired gun worked so well for the Sixers with Paul George. And James Harden, or Jimmy Butler, that's not a small detail. Embiid has been burned by big swings before. He's seen stars come to Philadelphia with fanfare, only for it to collapse under the weight of egos, injuries, or fit issues. So when a guy who just publicly called him a flopper shows up as the newest big swing, it's not exactly a situation Embiid has reason to trust blindly. Once McGrady's comments hit the internet, the story took on a life of its own. And that's when things really started to spiral. Tony Jones, who covers the 76ers directly for The Athletic, published a report contradicting McGrady within days. A source told him the report that Joel Embiid and Jaylen Brown have not spoken is inaccurate. The two of them have spoken, the source said. So now you've got dueling reports. On one side, a Hall of Famer, close to Brown personally, saying there's been zero contact. On the other, a beat reporter with sources inside the organization saying that's flat wrong. Both can't be true. Jones' report even quoted McGrady's original comment directly to show exactly what was being disputed. The speculation started because on the Cousins with Vince Carter and Tracy McGrady podcast episode, McGrady said JB was on the stream the other day. He reached out to Maxey. He talked to Maxey and he talked to VJ. But I don't think he has spoken to Embiid yet. They had their thing in past years. A personal thing going on. Now, they're teammates, and I don't think there's been a conversation between the two. At least not to my knowledge. That's a key detail people glossed over. McGrady didn't just say they hadn't talked. He said there was a personal thing going on between them in past years. That's not McGrady speculating about scheduling conflicts. That's him acknowledging there's real history, real tension, sitting underneath the silence. Naturally, once the correction came out, plenty of outlets tried to close the book on it fast. Jones' report should put this story to bed, according to some, and that can also be accomplished by Brown and Embiid just mentioning that they have spoken, allowing everyone to move on and focus on basketball. But neither Brown nor Embiid actually came out and said anything themselves. No quote from either player confirming a conversation happened. No joint interview. No photo of the two of them shaking hands. Just an anonymous source telling a reporter it happened. And that's worth sitting with. If two guys who are supposed to be building a championship partnership had actually talked and squashed the tension, wouldn't one of them just say so? A quick "yeah, we talked, we're good" from either player would have ended this instantly. Instead, it was McGrady's word against an unnamed source relayed through a different reporter. Neither Brown nor Embiid has personally, on the record, said they've spoken. Even people close to the situation admitted the timeline was murky. Maybe when McGrady and Carter recorded the podcast episode, Brown and Embiid hadn't spoken yet. Or maybe they had, and he was just misinformed. That's about as close to an honest shrug as you're going to get from anyone covering this. Behind the scenes, the front office was clearly trying to manage the temperature. Sixers president Mike Gansey went out of his way to paint a rosy picture of how Embiid was reacting to the news of the trade, saying he'd personally called Embiid the moment it happened. He is fired up. "I called him right after the trade, and he is excited," Gansey said. "It will obviously be a big change, but I think they are welcoming it." But here's the thing about that quote. It's Gansey describing Embiid's reaction to getting a new teammate. It says nothing about whether Embiid and Brown themselves have actually connected. A front office executive being excited about talent upgrade is not the same as two rivals burying the hatchet. Those are two completely separate stories that kept getting mashed together in the coverage. And that mashup is exactly why the story kept snowballing. Every time a positive-sounding quote from the organization came out, it got read as evidence the Brown-Embiid tension was resolved, when really it was just PR management from people whose job is to make trades look smooth on paper. Even coverage that tried to be reassuring couldn't help but flag how big a problem this could become if it dragged into the season. If it were true and carried into next season, it'd serve as the distraction Philadelphia didn't need as it goes after a title with its new star core. That's the quiet part everyone kept saying out loud without meaning to. This isn't a nothing story. If this drags into training camp with no resolution, it becomes the story of the Sixers' whole season before a single game tips off. Here's why this isn't just gossip. The Sixers didn't make this trade to add a nice depth piece. They made it because they believe Brown, alongside Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, gives them a real shot at a championship. And that entire bet collapses if the two best players in that locker room can't build real chemistry. Charles Barkley, who knows exactly what it takes to win in that city, was blunt about how big a swing this was for Philadelphia. "Man, the Sixers just got away with murder," he said. With Paul George's contract and Joel Embiid's inability to stay healthy, they were going to be out of the running for the next 4 to 5 years. Now they're legitimate contenders. But Barkley's excitement came with a specific caveat about what this trade means for Embiid personally. He framed it almost like a lifeline. Barkley said that this trade could redefine things for the two-time scoring champion. "This might save his career," Barkley said. "He ain't got to be the best player. He's just got to try to stay healthy. I think Joel and Tyrese have to be the happiest two dudes in the NBA right now." Read that again. Barkley is saying Embiid no longer has to be the guy. Brown can absorb some of that burden. On paper, that should be exactly what Embiid wants. Less pressure, less wear on his body. A real shot at a ring without having to be Superman every single night. But that only works if Embiid actually trusts Brown enough to hand him the ball in big moments. And trust is exactly what's in question here. Because remember, this same era where the Sixers are betting everything on chemistry is the era where reports have specifically flagged Brown's ability to mesh with other stars as a concern. Before the trade even happened, whispers were already circulating out of Boston questioning whether Brown could coexist with a fellow franchise cornerstone. According to ESPN's Shams Charania, Boston already had questions about the fit on a personal level between Brown and fellow star Jason Tatum before making the trade. Let that sink in. This isn't just an Embiid problem. Brown's own organization, the team that drafted him, developed him, and won a title with him, had documented concerns about how he got along with the other superstar on his own roster before they ever shipped him out. So when Brown lands in Philadelphia and immediately runs into silence with Embiid, that's not an isolated incident. That's a pattern extending across two different franchises with two different superstar partners. Add in the outside noise that was swirling before the trade even closed, and it gets uglier. Colin Cowherd fueled the noise by sharing an anonymous executive's harsh assessment of Jaylen Brown. And soon after, more reports questioned his locker room influence and chemistry with Jason Tatum. So the exact same criticisms that shadowed him in Boston, locker room fit, personal chemistry with a co-star, followed him straight to Philadelphia and landed on exactly the same question with Embiid. Not everyone was buying the pile-on though. Austin Rivers went to bat for Brown publicly and pushed back hard on the idea that his personality was the problem. Rivers said, "I've seen so much negativity come Jaylen Brown's way. And I'm not saying he is the most politically correct. I'm not saying his intelligence is easy to manage on a day-to-day basis, but he's done nothing wrong." That's a defense, sure. But notice it's not actually denying the friction exists. It's arguing the friction shouldn't matter as much as it does. And on the court, this partnership has a very real physical component too. Embiid's health has been the single biggest obstacle to Philadelphia's championship hopes for years, and that reality doesn't disappear just because a new star showed up. The hope from the organization's side is that Brown's presence takes enough pressure off Embiid that his body can hold up deeper into the playoffs. Having Brown around should actually make Embiid's life easier, as the Sixers are better constructed to handle things when he needs to miss time, which will be inevitable, given Philadelphia wants its star center to be at his best come playoff time. That's the tightrope. If Brown and Embiid can actually build real trust, this Sixers roster looks like one of the scariest in the East. The move shifted the balance of power in the East, pairing Brown with lead guard Tyrese Maxey, to give the Sixers a dynamic 1-2 offensive punch that can go toe-to-toe with any team in the conference, with Brown and Maxey having finished 4th and 5th respectively in the NBA in scoring last season, and Brown's addition easing Maxey's burden. But if the silence between the two stars is real, and it lingers, none of that talent matters. Chemistry has sunk far more talented rosters than this one. So where does this stand right now? Brown is in Philadelphia. He's wearing the jersey. He's already been introduced as part of a new big three alongside Embiid and Maxey. And the front office is doing everything it can to project unity. Carefully worded statements, upbeat quotes about being fired up, reassurances that this is a fresh start for everybody. But strip away the PR, and what you actually have is this. A player who spent a decade building a genuine, documented rivalry with his new franchise center. One built on playoff losses, public accusations of flopping, and claims that officials had it out for him. A Hall of Fame mentor close enough to that player to know his day-to-day habits. Going on the record to say there'd been no conversation at all between the two, and specifically noting there was a personal thing between them in past years. A competing report that walked it back, but relied entirely on an anonymous source rather than either player actually speaking for himself. And a front office quietly hoping the story disappears before training camp, because if it doesn't, it becomes the storyline that follows this team into the regular season. Head coach Brad Stevens tried to project calm when asked directly about how this all fits together, refusing to get pulled into speculation about the relationship. Jaylen Brown is a big part of us. I don't want to predict the future. I look at it as this is our team, Stevens said. That's a coach choosing his words carefully, not denying tension exists, just refusing to engage with it publicly. And that's really the story here. Not a screaming match, not a public blow-up. Something quieter and, in a lot of ways, more concerning. Two of the most important players on a title-contending roster who, as of the most recent reporting, still haven't had a real conversation confirmed by either of them personally. Not a text Brown can point to, not a joint statement, just competing reports from people around them, while the two men at the center of it all stay silent. Brown himself has shown before that he knows how to walk back a controversial moment when he wants to. The cleanup tweet after the Bronny comments proved that, if he and Embiid had genuinely spoken and moved past their history, it would take one sentence from either of them to end this entire conversation. The fact that sentence still hasn't come, even weeks into this trade, tells you everything about where this relationship actually stands going into a season where everything is riding on it working. Jaylen Brown, Joel Embiid haven't spoken since blockbuster 76ers trade. Tracy McGrady, Yahoo Sports, new NBA rumors on Jaylen Brown and Joel Embiid's relationship after 76ers Celtics trade. Bleacher Report, Sixers hit with worrying Jaylen Brown. Joel Embiid update heavy.com. Celtics Jaylen Brown rips refs, calls out Embiid for flopping. ESPN. Jaylen Brown Joel Embiid report already unraveled after reassuring update. The Sixers sense. Jaylen Brown reaches out to former 76ers adversary after stunning Celtics trade. Yahoo Sports. 76ers insider reveals the truth about Jaylen Brown. Joel Embiid as Tracy McGrady's report goes horribly wrong. Yahoo Sports. Jaylen Brown's awkward Joel Embiid criticism resurfaces after Philadelphia 76ers trade. Yahoo Sports. Jaylen Brown's workout in Philly. Beef with Joel Embiid. And more things to know about the new Sixers star. The Inquirer. This might save his career. Charles Barkley says adding Jaylen Brown could redefine Embiid. NBC Sports Philadelphia. Jaylen Brown dissed Joel Embiid. Now the former Celtic star is Embiid's teammate. Press Herald. Jaylen Brown set to form all-star trio with Joel Embiid. Tyrese Maxey in Philadelphia. Washington Post. LeBron James still hasn't forgotten Jaylen Brown's criticism of Bronny during the Summer League. Yahoo Sports. Jaylen Brown clarifies alleged Bronny James criticism at Summer League game. Fox Sports. LeBron James shows major support for Jaylen Brown despite past comments on Bronny James. Yardbarker. LeBron James still remembers Jaylen Brown's Bronny comments at Summer League 2 years ago. Yahoo Sports. It ain't like he was on a rampage. Cameron explains why LeBron James shouldn't have an issue with Jaylen Brown doubting Bronny's potential basketball network. The Philadelphia Heist. Boston's gamble that rewired the NBA, the Hype magazine. Most shocking NBA trades in recent history. Clutch points. Jaylen Brown's past accusation of Joel Embiid raises questions after 76ers trade. Yahoo Sports. https://sports.yahoo.coms. Articles Jaylen Brown's past accusation. Joel 110,100,827.html.